We're back for the second episode of Hands Off the Mic, a series where I share and discuss your comments on both Discord and YouTube on a specific topic in Warriors, and have my patrons voice those comments to give the title some literal value. My opinions are far from the only important ones, so it's always nice to see what others have to say. With that said, today's topic is Starclan. Not exactly an unpopular thing to discuss in the fandom, that's for sure. This discussion could encompass the conflicting viewpoints on what Starclan is, in or out of universe, or what impact Starclan's portrayal has made on Warriors as a franchise. What exactly is Starclan's role in the universe of Warriors, and has that, or rather, how much has that, changed since the series was created? Are there any characters in or out of Starclan who have been impacted by their roles in the afterlife? And are there any ways we could fix some of the problems with Starclan from this point onward? Well, those are some of the questions I'm hoping to answer today. And to do that, I'll need to turn to all of you.
I liked Starclan, however what was so appealing about Starclan in the first arc was the mystery and mystic aspect of Starclan. We, the reader, didn't understand Starclan and how they operated at the time. Slowly as time progressed, the writers dived more and more into Starclan and how it operated, especially in Power of Three, and by doing that, they removed the mystic aspect of it. Instead of dead cats whose actions were confusing to us and mysterious, it became, why the heck did they do that? That's corrupt and evil. Especially with the Squirrel Flight and Leaf Pool situation. I think that while Starclan can be good for the overall plot, if the authors focus on it too much, it really brings into question some of Starclan's actions. Some examples would be Juniper Claw and how he was subjected to the Dark Forest for poisoning someone, even though he tried to redeem himself when he realized he was wrong by literally sacrificing his life for Shadowsight.
The sentiment about Starclan's conceptual degradation since the first arc was one I saw echoed in a lot of comments. The idea that Starclan started out well as a mysterious presence that we could speculate about, but became worse for the story as we learn more about them, is definitely popular, and yeah, there's a reason. With Starclan as a mysterious force, we couldn't analyze their motive with as much direct evidence, and the things they did or didn't do could still be attributed to many possible things. Nearly everyone who commented agreed that by the time Squirrel Flight and Leafpool were put on trial to justify their actions years ago that were specifically ordered by Starclan, the ancestors could not be counted as entirely good or blameless anymore. But exactly where they crossed that line was up for debate.
I think, like many people, my outlook on Starclan took a nosedive because of their treatment and cutoff of SkyClan during the most vulnerable time, as their territory was being destroyed by humans, and how they just allowed the other clans to kick them out.
Squishy Narwhals, for example, found the scenes in Firestar's quest where Starclan's transgressions against SkyClan are revealed to the reader and purposefully hidden from Firestar and the clans to be the beginning of the end for finding Starclan to be a good, or at least uninvolved, force. Of course, that's not the only place people look to.
The concept of being mysterious warrior ancestors in the first arc was, well, fantastic. It's what those books needed. There was mystery surrounding them back then. So much we didn't know. We got to fill in the gaps with our own fan theories, AUs, etc. In arcs 2 through 4, and even really 5, Starclan's involvement was a lot heavier, but it was okay. The plots with the Dark Forest and everything, though they brought the series deeper into the fantasy realm, were cool, unique concepts. Up until the Dark Forest battle, only select special cats could commune with Starclan, and the Dark Forest battle, at first, was just some one-off thing. And honestly, the concept of the good Starclan cats coming down to fight the Dark Forest cats was super fun. But in the latest 2 arcs, Starclan is declining. They're corrupted. They've become way too involved in the cats' lives. We know way too much about them. There's no mystery to fill in the gaps. Instead, more and more information about them is being added in, to the point of retcons. It is, in fact, affecting the books as a whole, not just the plots having to do with Starclan.
ThatArtisticBookworm was fine with the deeper exploration of Starclan and its twin afterlife, the Dark Forest, as long as it was a one-off occurrence, or reserved for special cats who have more connections with their ancestors. The trade-off of getting to see more fantasy elements was worth the lack of mystery. The issues for them came when, even after the Dark Forest battle, Starclan continued being involved in so many protagonists' and others' lives, and we continued to see enough of them in enough new stories that they had to contradict their previous material to keep writing fresh ideas. And as they allude to, Starclan as a narrative presence doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the problems it has end up extending to the quality of a lot of the story.
The storyline's usage of Starclan frequently hinders the growth of the living characters. All too often, characters are shown yielding to Starclan's will instead of following their own impulses and aspirations. This reliance on Starclan's guidance can be unsatisfying for readers who want to see the characters exhibit more independence and personal growth.
This comment touches on an idea that is really close to my heart. If you haven't been able to tell yet by hearing me yammer about it or reading Paws of Stars, I really care about agency in fiction. Characters being able to play out their own values through their choices, and in doing so, show the readers who they are or what they are growing to become is an essential part of storytelling. And having the clans rely mostly or solely on the will of Starclan to determine when, if, or how they act at all prevents that from happening. Instead of learning about the focal character we are following, we're just learning about Starclan's characterization. And because their job is just to follow the needs of the plot, the characterization they have isn't, consistent.
The Aarons never knew what they wanted from Starclan, and it changes from arc to arc until Starclan feels like a group of token characters who have no real power or set moral system. Speaking of power, what is the power behind Starclan? Where does it come from? What does it do? At least the answer to the third question changes based on the book or arc. It ends up being frustrating to read because there's no continuity. They also don't have much autonomy, which takes away from the intrigue they build up in the first arc.
If you left Starclan as a mysterious force, there wouldn't be as much of a need from the fans to ask all of these questions. Hey, in the first arc, we didn't know there was a power behind Starclan, but by the prologue of the second arc, it was something they had established, and they kept establishing lore that only offered more questions, and with it, more frustration from the readers.
Starclan worked so poorly that I genuinely believe they were the villains all along if I didn't know the Aarons better than that. They tell the clan cags they know everything, but in prologues and the like we constantly see Starclan worried and not knowing what's going on or what to do. They sort cats into Starclan of the Dark Forest, but only with a few very biased cats as judge, jury and executioner. They say in Firestar's Quest they can't govern the choices clans make, but time and again we see that it is not true. Even as far back as Leafpool in the New Prophecy, Starclan is very happily meddling in every cat's affairs and telling everyone to do what they want.
Displacing the agency of cats onto Starclan wasn't enough. Once Starclan needed to be blameless too, they started displacing blame onto a tertiary amorphous source, which left Starclan with entirely inconsistent amounts of both power and knowledge, meaning that when they declare their level of power or justify themselves based on it, they look like manipulative liars. It's not surprising fans started to see them as villains.
After some recent books, Squirrelflight's Hope, A Light in the Mist, Starclan being fundamentally good has sort of become a mystery for the readers too. In Squirrelflight's Hope, perhaps one of the biggest head-scratchers in the entire series is that Starclan put Squirrelflight and Leafpool on trial for something Starclan told them to do and coerced them into and lied to them about 6 or 7 years ago. And the sisters were already punished for it socially, with several broken relationships that have since been mended. A Light in the Mist shows that Starclan straight up does not believe in redemption, something many children's shows advocate for. I think this is strange messaging for a younger audience. No matter how cats like Snowtuft want to help, or cats like Juniperclaw and Silverhawk want redemption, Starclan said no, there's no changing after death. At this point, I agree with the villains of the current arc, Splashtail and Curlfeather, whose initial premise is that they want to rely less on Starclan.
And as Higgy says here, all of this ties back into Starclan's morality. Starclan is consistently framed as the moral backbone of the clans, always good and correct and the force that, if lost, leaves the clans in ruins and not feeding their elders anymore. The framing of the story tells us that the world is black and white, especially in the afterlives, and levels of good or badness are fundamental to cats. Aside from that being a bad message for the audience they're catering towards, it becomes worse since the only good Starclan has made plenty of mistakes or cruel decisions themselves. And cats in the only bad Dark Forest have shown their potential for good deeds and values as well.
All of the issues of Starclan are not portrayed that way by the narrative, but rather as misunderstandings and someone else's fault. Starclan waves the problems they created onto someone else and says that this is the way things need to be. They say they cannot change it, but they can. They have stepped in to intervene in fate multiple times. I am aware this is just bad writing, but it feels so gross. The books themselves do not condemn Starclan's contradictions. Determinism in Warriors drives me up a wall, because nothing is determined, in real life or just the next arc in advance. Things can and will change as time passes, and more books come along. There's a million ways they could fix it, but they don't. Because in Warriors, there can't be a redemption or villain arc. Someone is either good or bad, no changes. If someone is redeemed, they were just good all along, actually. If someone becomes a villain, they were harboring resentment their whole life, you just didn't know it. And I'd honestly prefer if they'd pick one for Starclan instead of whatever we have now.
The lack of morality, lack of agency, lack of knowledge, and lack of power have left Starclan as a confusing and frustrating entity for certain. One that you as a reader could easily blame for many of the key plot points in the series. But ever and always, the books do not blame or even acknowledge blame for Starclan, because they can't. The way their black and white world works, Starclan can't have done anything wrong, or the whole system of the clans would need to change. And half of the resolutions to plotlines would require much more finesse than just saying an evil cat was vanquished forever, or a good cat finally followed Starclan's will, like they should have from the beginning. Of course, even stepping aside from the morality questions, Starclan's prominence in the Warriors world has another narrative effect that many people would prefer to avoid.
When your character can speak to their dead friends and family constantly, it makes death feel cheap and less impactful. Starclan takes away how terrible it is to lose a loved one. I wish it stayed as it was in the first series, with Starclan having little impact, only giving prophecies and not being too involved in the story.
Most cats and warriors, especially since the Dark Forest battle, have known objectively that their loved ones are okay, looking out for them, and could get direct messages to them. With so many point-of-view characters in particular, they have the promise of speaking directly to lost loved ones on a regular basis. Even if Dustpelt can be sad that Ferncloud is gone, Jayfeather could talk to Hollyleaf on any day he wants. And as readers, we will always be able to see old favorites again, separating us from whatever remaining grief the characters are going through in-universe. Maybe going back to a time when Starclan was much more hands-off, or even just abandoning every Medicine Cat protagonist for a while, would help to bring back some of the impact of death. As it is now, though...
I think Starclan makes this entire series extremely low stakes. Deaths like Leaf Pools do not hit hard because she is in perfect cat heaven with her family, and her living family pretty much knows for sure they'll join her eventually. That's why Bristlefrost's death felt so visceral. That's why the entire fandom is begging for a book about Ivy Pool's grief when so many other moms lost kits. Because in real life, grief is the horror of losing your child and not really knowing where they are or if you'll see them again.
Even from an in-universe standpoint, death isn't something the cats have to take as seriously, since everyone knows for a fact that Starclan exists, is a great place, and is where virtually anyone they know would be going. I will never stop pointing out that the Dark Forest has less than 20 cats total across its entire history. In order to correct for this, and give anything stakes, they had to introduce fading, so cats like Spotted Leaf and Bristlefrost can still pull at our heartstrings somehow. Honestly, a lot of the problems with Starclan were almost certainly caused by trying to correct for a gap or error in the narrative, only to create several more problems in the meantime. Knowing that, are there any ways to fix it? Are there any ways to make Starclan and its place in the story better from this point onward?
The idea of a corrupted afterlife with morally ambiguous values in a story. I love it. Headcanons could do wonders for Starclan, and they have, in my own mind. But what's on the page isn't quite what I mean. Imagine how different the books would be if the Aarons explored the idea that sometimes Starclan doesn't have the clan's best interests at heart. Instead of being a unified entity, it could consist of many different cats with varying opinions and views, both good and bad.
One of the ways that it could be fixed, as Ratner Manor suggests, is to acknowledge it. Say that Starclan is morally ambiguous, and let the cats of the clans learn and deal with that idea. Starclan is a body of cats with a lot of varied and sometimes contradictory voices in it, so let them openly disagree. Let the clans notice who they are, and most importantly, let those facts change how the clans see them. Whether you outright make Starclan the antagonist for an arc, or just show their flaws in a more balanced way, this could definitely lead to an interesting and less frustrating story.
I like to think of Starclan as beyond the comprehension of the clans. The Starry Warriors don't control everything, but it gives the clans stability if they think they have godlike beings looking out for them. The forest is being destroyed? Well, never fear, Starclan knew this might happen and planned for it. The evil cats who live on in the dark forest are training living cats to enact their revenge? Starclan will fight beside us, they've got it handled. Knowing a family member lives on also gives them peace of mind and heart. They could be over-exaggerating Starclan's connection to the living cats in their minds and believe they know all there is to know about Starclan. Starclan might have an expanded view of life, but not as much as the clans believe, and many of the relationships that living cats believe they have with the dead are likely one-sided.
We also have Tiny Dancer's suggestion that the level of direct connection the clans currently have with Starclan could be rewritten as what the clans imagine or want from their ancestors, or what they use to rationalize their reality. This would necessitate retconning our understanding of most current material, but it would hardly be the first time they've done that, and the situation afterwards would be the closest possible version to the Starclan of the first arc. From there, we'd have the chance, slowly, to build up a distance between the clans and their ancestors again.
Starclan as a force has the potential to be a very unique form of guide and guardian for the clans, who secretly are fed only a pawful more information than the clans themselves from somewhere. The concept in and of itself is relatively sound, and has the potential for very interesting plotlines and the possibility to lead to fun and thrilling directions. If it was up to me, I'd put their level of interaction as an absolute minimum until the time when the clans were in dire straits and some level of divine intervention may be necessary.
Sir Butters agrees with the idea of keeping Starclan's future interactions to a minimum, but they also touch on an additional idea that may be of interest: to actively explore what force may be behind Starclan's powers. It may be a secret from the clans, and maybe that could even factor into the story, but with a perspective in Starclan itself, we could learn who or what grants Starclan itself their powers, and perhaps, from there, we'd have the chance to merge the ideas of acknowledging Starclan's current ambiguous status and still creating a distant, unknowable afterlife. It could certainly open some interesting possibilities, if nothing else.
I honestly liked Positive Star's Starclan system more than the canon ones. I specifically enjoyed the part about Starclan and the Dark Forest's power being linked. This would give an explanation for the prophecy system, as being cryptic would give the Dark Forest less power. In canon, I believe that Starclan isn't given enough limitation to justify not helping clans more. Overall, I wish we had a Starclan perspective, even if just for a super edition, to give us some kind of canon reason Starclan didn't intervene directly when stuff like, I don't know, a serial killer like Broken Start becomes a leader, which has happened 3 times that we know of.
I fully admit that this one is accidental self-indulgence, but my personal idea for how to fix Starclan's issues is admittedly not one that would work well if we started now. The lore I used for Pause of Stars starts from the end of the New Prophecy and uses elements from Power of 3 and Omen of the Stars, but it doesn't have to deal with multiple arcs worth of initial and rewritten Dark Forest lore, all of which is, bad. It doesn't have to deal with the trial system implemented to decide who goes to Starclan in the Dark Forest. And it doesn't have to deal with whatever ingrained connection to Starclan DNA some cats just have or don't in the modern arcs. I do like the lore I came up with for Pause of Stars. I think it works well for the story I wanted to tell on both plot and thematic levels, as well as explaining some of the inconsistencies in Starclan's moral portrayal. But I had that luxury because I wasn't working with the series as it is now. If you're interested in fanfic, roleplay, animation, or otherwise, I fully encourage you to keep the spiral of issues Warriors' Afterlives have fallen into in mind, so that you can avoid these pitfalls yourself and replace the odd lore with something that makes more sense and works better with your own story. However, for those who have to write Warriors from this point onwards, the contradictions are something you will have to reckon with, and the longer you choose to ignore or retcon explanations for the problems, the worse and more destructive those problems will become. As always, thank you for sharing your thoughts on Starclan. I read every comment that comes in for this series, even though I can't fit them all into the video. The ones for this episode in particular were all longer and more detailed on average than those for my previous video, which gave me a lot to work with, but also a requirement to cut more out. I genuinely would encourage that people go and read the full comments people have made on these posts, whether or not they appeared in videos, because Starclan is, at this point, a very complicated, irritating, and pervasive topic within Warriors, and there are a lot of people who have great thoughts on it to share. It's genuinely been a pleasure to share the stage with you as I learn more about fandom opinions than I could from my personal narrow viewpoint. Until next time, everyone. Now hand me back that mic.